My phone buzzed at 9 p.m., vibrating frantically against the nightstand. The screen illuminated the dark room with a notification from my father. My parents said to send them $50,000 ASAP. Didn't say why. I came to them without warning and found out this money was for my spoiled sister's wedding, who always hated me. So I refused and everything changed. But right then, I only knew fear. The text lacked context, just a frantic demand. I dialed immediately. But the call went straight to voicemail. Silence is heavy when you expect tragedy. My mind filled the blanks with worst-case scenarios. I pictured my mother in a hospital bed hooked to machines, or my father cornered by debt collectors. We weren't rich, and $50,000 was an impossible sum, unless lives were at stake. I didn't pack a suitcase. I just grabbed my wallet, keys, and laptop. Within 10 minutes, I was in a car speeding toward the airport, watching the city blur, and praying I wasn't too late to fix this. The flight felt like 6 hours of purgatory. I spent the time frantically moving money between accounts. Liquidating the mutual fund I had spent 5 years building. That money was my down payment for a condo, my escape plan, my future. But if my parents were in danger, the money didn't matter. That was the rule I had lived by since childhood. I was the fixer. If they needed me to bleed myself dry to save them, I would do it without hesitation. By the time I landed, my hands shook so badly I could barely sign the rental agreement. The drive to the suburbs was a blur of familiar streets that suddenly looked hostile. I checked my phone at every red light, desperate for an update, but there was nothing. Just that initial, terrifying command to pay up. My stomach twisted into knots. I imagined pulling up to a house surrounded by police cars or ambulances, preparing myself to be the strong daughter who handled the crisis. When I turned onto their street, the air left my lungs. I expected darkness or the flashing red lights of emergency vehicles. Instead, the house was blazing with light. Every lamp in the living room was on, casting a golden glow onto the manicured lawn. There was no ambulance in the driveway, just my father's sedan sitting peacefully in its spot. The normalcy of the scene hit me harder than the panic. It didn't look like a disaster zone. It looked like a celebration. I killed the engine and sat in silence, trying to reconcile the frantic text with this peaceful reality. My heart was still hammering against my ribs, but the rhythm had changed. It wasn't fear anymore, it was confusion sharpening into suspicion. I walked up the driveway, my legs heavy. Through the cracked window, I didn't hear sobbing or screaming. I heard laughter. As I reached for the doorknob, the scent of vanilla drifted out to meet me. The fear in my chest curdled into ice. I pushed the door open, the lock clicking loudly in the quiet night. Inside, the hallway was warm, smelling of fresh coffee, and something sugary baking in the oven. It was disorienting. I was still wearing the same wrinkled clothes I had thrown on 6 hours ago, sweat drying cold on my back. My chest heaved as I stepped onto the plush carpet, waiting for the chaos to find me. Instead, I heard the soft clink of a ceramic mug against a coaster. My father sat in his leather recliner, legs crossed at the ankle, flipping through a car magazine. My mother was on the sofa, a notepad balanced on her knee. When they saw me, the air left the room. They didn't jump up to embrace me or cry with relief. My mother froze, her pen hovering over the paper. while my father slowly closed his magazine. They looked like teenagers caught breaking curfew, not parents in the middle of a life-altering crisis. "Morgan," my mother said, her voice pitched too high. "You didn't say you were coming." I stood there, trembling from adrenaline withdrawal, scanning the room for danger. There were no hospital papers, no past due notices, just throw pillows and soft lighting. "You asked for $50,000, I rasped, my throat raw from the dry airplane air. "I thought Dad was dying. I thought you were losing the house." My eyes darted between them, begging for an explanation that made sense. My father cleared his throat, shifting uncomfortably in his chair. "We said it was urgent. We didn't say anyone was dying." He wouldn't meet my eyes. My mother stood up quickly, moving to block my view of the dining room archway. "You are tired," she said, her smile brittle and practiced. "Let's get you some tea. We can talk about the details in the morning." Her sudden movement was a red flag. She wasn't comforting me, she was hiding something. I sidestepped her outstretched hand and walked toward the dining table. She tried to grab my elbow, her grip surprisingly tight. But I shook her off. The dining room, usually reserved for Thanksgiving, was covered in debris. But it wasn't the debris of financial ruin. It was an explosion of white tulle, gold-embossed cardstock, and silk ribbons. Glossy brochures were fanned out across the mahogany surface like a winning poker hand. I stopped, staring down at the glossy chaos. My hand reached out, fingers hovering over a thick binder labeled "The Grand Estate Venue." Next to it lay a contract for a floral package that cost more than my first year of college tuition. The numbers on the page were staggering. This wasn't a utility bill or a mortgage payment. It was a fantasy being built on credit. The realization hit me with physical force. The emergency wasn't a threat to their survival. It was a threat to their vanity. "The deposit deadline is this morning," my mother said from behind me, her voice losing its sweetness. "If we don't pay, she loses the date. It is an emergency, Morgan." I turned slowly to face them. My father had returned to his magazine, refusing to engage, while my mother stood with her arms crossed, defiant. They hadn't called me because they were scared. They called because I was the bank, and the bank had finally walked through the front door. The sharp click of heels on tile announced her arrival. Chloe appeared in the doorway, holding a macaron like a prop. She looked immaculate, her hair blown out in soft waves, and her skin glowing with expensive treatments. She stopped when she saw me, her expression shifting from boredom to mild irritation. "You are here," she said. "I thought you were just wiring the money." She didn't ask if I was okay. She just stared at my wrinkled travel clothes with disappointment. I stared at her left hand. A diamond the size of a grape sat heavy on her finger, catching the light with aggressive sparkle. It looked like it cost more than my car. "I thought Dad was dying," I said. Chloe rolled her eyes, a gesture so familiar it made my stomach turn. "Don't be dramatic, Morgan," she sighed, nibbling her cookie. "Mom tends to exaggerate when she's stressed. We just need the venue deposit secured. It's really not that complicated." $50,000, I repeated. "For a deposit." My mother stepped forward, smoothing a swatch on the table. "It's for the Grand Estate package," she explained, as if that made it reasonable. "It includes florals, catering, and the crystal stemware upgrade. It's a bundled deal, Morgan. We save money in the long run. I looked at the binder. The numbers were astronomical. They weren't asking for help. They were asking me to underwrite a coronation for a sister who barely spoke to me. Chloe walked over to the table and tapped a photo of a floral archway. I need this for the ceremony, she said. The other one looked cheap. She glanced at me, her expression expectant. You have the money, right? Dad said your promotion came with a big bonus. I looked at my father. He was studying the carpet, avoiding my gaze. He had told them about my savings. He had inventoried my life and offered it up to her without asking. A cold heat started in my chest. I had worked 80-hour weeks for that bonus. I had skipped vacations, cooked cheap meals, and driven a car with a broken heater to build that safety net. Now, they wanted to liquidate my sweat equity for crystal stemware. That money is my down payment, I said quietly. It's for a home. Chloe laughed, a short, sharp sound. You live in an apartment, Morgan. You are fine. I am starting a family. This is important. My mother placed a hand on my arm, her touch light but controlling. Morgan, be reasonable. Your sister only gets married once. We want to give her the day she deserves. She smiled. The same smile she used to smooth over arguments when we were kids. We all make sacrifices for family. That's what love is. I looked at the lavish spread on the table. The sacrifice was always mine. The reward was always hers. It wasn't love. It was robbery. I stepped back, shaking my head. I flew across the country because I thought you were in danger. I was ready to empty my accounts to save your lives. The room went silent for a beat. Then Chloe scoffed, checking her hair in the dark window. God, you are always so intense, she muttered. Nobody asked you to fly here. We just asked for the check. Why do you have to make everything about you? The audacity struck me harder than a slap. I stared at the glossy brochure, a bitter taste rising in my throat like bile. For 3 years, I had wired them checks every single month. $500 here. 1,000 there. They told me it was for Dad's blood pressure medication, or the leaky roof that threatened to mold over the guest room. I've been sending you money since I got my first paycheck, I said, my voice steady but cold. You told me you were barely scraping by. My father finally looked up, his face reddening with a mix of defensive anger and embarrassment. We use that money for essentials, Morgan. Life is expensive. He waved a hand dismissively, as if my sacrifice was a rounding error in his ledger. You have no idea what it costs to maintain a house this size in this economy. My mother nodded in agreement, smoothing her silk blouse. We did what we had to do to keep the family afloat. Essentials, I repeated, reaching into my pocket. I pulled out my phone, the screen cracking slightly at the corner. Is that what we're calling them now? I opened the photo gallery. I had stopped trusting their vague, sob stories 6 months ago. I created a burner account on Instagram to see what they were really doing, while I ate instant noodles to save money. I want to show you something, I said, sliding the phone across the polished table. Chloe glanced at the screen and stiffened. It was a photo from last November. My parents were holding tropical cocktails on a white sand beach in Cabo. You told me the furnace broke, I said, pointing at the date stamp. I sent you $2,000 for repairs, because you said the house was freezing. You spent it on margaritas. My father's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping in his cheek. He didn't deny it. He just looked annoyed. I swiped to the next photo without waiting for an excuse. My mother was posing with a designer handbag that cost more than my monthly rent. And this? I asked. You said Dad needed dental surgery. You said he was in pain and couldn't chew. My mother snatched the phone, turning it face down on the table. Everyone needs a little joy. Morgan, she snapped, her voice trembling with indignation. We can't live in misery just because you do. The betrayal wasn't just about the lying, it was about the hierarchy. I drove a car with no air conditioning, so you could go to a resort, I said. And now you want 50,000 more. I looked at Chloe, who was checking her cuticles, bored by the accounting. Where did the money for the engagement party come from? I asked. The one you posted about in January. I sent checks for medical bills during that exact same week. My mother let out a sharp sigh, as if I were a toddler asking too many questions. We couldn't let Chloe celebrate in a backyard, she said, lifting her chin. She deserves the best start in life. Yes, we used your help for the deposit. It was family money, Morgan. It belongs to all of us. The truth hung in the air, toxic and heavy. My help wasn't charity. It was a tribute paid to the golden child. My father slammed his hand on the table, rattling the crystal stemware he expected me to buy. That is enough, he boomed, his voice shaking the walls. We raised you, Morgan. We put clothes on your back and food in your mouth for 18 years. He stood up, looming over me like a thunderstorm, casting a long shadow across the wedding plans. You think you owe us nothing. You think a few checks cover the cost of raising a child. Chloe chimed in, her voice dripping with artificial pity. She's just jealous, Daddy. Look at her. She gestured vaguely at my unwashed hair and travel clothes. She has no life, no boyfriend, no prospects. She turned to me, her eyes hard as diamonds. You are bitter because I am happy, Morgan. You want to ruin my wedding, because you are miserable alone in that tiny apartment. Her words were sharp little darts, aimed precisely at my deepest insecurities about being unlovable. My mother stepped between us, playing the diplomat in a war she started. Nobody wants to fight, she soothed, though her eyes remained cold. But the vendors have been promised the money, Morgan. If the checks bounce, it will be a humiliation for this entire family. She leaned in close, smelling of expensive perfume and coercion. Do you want that on your conscience? Do you want to be the reason your sister is the laughingstock of the town? I looked at their faces, searching for a trace of the people I thought I was saving. My father's red-faced entitlement, my mother's manipulative concern, Chloe's smug expectation. They didn't see a person standing in front of them. They saw a resource. A walking ATM with a pulse. For years, I believed I was buying their safety, but I was just paying rent for my place in their hearts. The realization didn't hurt. It cauterized the wound instantly. You fed me, because you legally had to, I said, my voice dangerously quiet. That wasn't a loan. That was parenting, my father scoffed, crossing his thick arms over his chest. It was an investment. And now it is time for the return. He pointed a thick finger at the checkbook in my bag. You have the money. We need it. It is that simple. Unless you want us to tell everyone that you abandoned your family. Chloe picked up her phone, scrolling through a message thread with frantic speed. I already posted about the venue, she murmured, almost to herself. All my friends know. I can't take it back now. She looked up, panic finally flickering behind her eyes. Morgan. I already put the down payment on the credit card. Dad said you would pay it off before the interest hit. My jaw dropped. They hadn't just asked. They had gambled with my money. They had spent my savings before I even boarded the plane. My father's emergency text wasn't a request, it was a collection notice for a debt I never signed up for. I looked at the wedding binder. Then at the people who shared my DNA. They were strangers with familiar faces. You didn't call me because you missed me, I whispered. You called me because the bill came due. The silence that followed was the loudest confirmation I could have received. A sound bubbled up from my chest, sharp and involuntary. It wasn't a sob, but a dry, jagged laugh that scraped my throat on the way out. My father took a step back, his face twisting in confusion, while Chloe stared at me like I had lost my mind. You think this is funny? She screeched, clutching her phone like a weapon. I looked at the three of them. The entitlement, the delusion, the sheer audacity. It is, I choked out, wiping a tear that wasn't from sadness. You lured me here with panic to rob me. I straightened my spine, feeling the heavy exhaustion shed away like dead skin. The fear of losing them had controlled me for a decade, but now I saw there was absolutely nothing left to lose. I am not paying for this wedding, I said, enunciating every syllable clearly. I am not paying for the flowers, the venue, or the dress. Not a single penny. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. My mother's mouth opened and closed like a fish on dry land, unable to process the refusal. Then the dam broke. My father lunged forward, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. You ungrateful brat! He roared, slamming his fist onto the table again, making the silverware jump. After everything we did, we gave you a home! We gave you a name! Chloe started crying, not soft weeping, but loud, ugly sobs meant to draw an audience. You are ruining everything, she wailed, stomping her foot like a toddler. You are doing this on purpose just to hurt me. Why do you hate me so much? Hate you? I asked, my voice cutting through the noise. I gave up art school so you could have braces. I drove a 10-year-old car so you could have a prom dress. I turned to my parents, who were watching Chloe with pained expressions. I haven't taken a vacation in 4 years because I was sending you emergency funds every month. The memories of missed opportunities and cheap dinners flooded back, fueling my resolve. I was building your safety net while you were building her a golden throne. Chloe grabbed the heavy wedding binder and hurled it across the room. It struck the wall near my head, pages fluttering down to the floor like wounded birds. I don't care about your stupid car, she screamed, her face blotchy and distorted with rage. This is my day! I promised everyone the grand estate! If I have to change venues now, I'll look like a failure. She wasn't worried about the cost, she was worried about the optic. Her reputation was the only currency she understood. My mother rushed to Chloe, wrapping her arms around the sobbing girl. But her eyes were locked on me. Morgan, please, she begged, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. We already signed the contracts. We told the coordinator the check was coming from your account. If it bounces, they'll sue us. She stepped closer, invading my personal space with desperate energy. Do you want your father to go to court? Do you want to see us dragged through legal trouble over a simple bank transfer? The words stopped me cold. You told them it was coming from my account, I asked, a fresh wave of horror washing over me. They hadn't just assumed I would say yes. They had effectively committed fraud. My father shifted his weight, looking at the floor. We knew you would help, he grumbled, avoiding my gaze. We didn't think you'd be so difficult about family supporting family. They had treated my bank account like a joint asset, bypassing my consent entirely. It was theft with a smile. That isn't support, I said, backing away toward the hallway. That is financial abuse. The term hung in the air, ugly and accurate. My mother flinched as if I had slapped her. How dare you, she hissed, her demeanor hardening instantly. We are your parents. Everything you have is because of us. She pointed a manicured finger at my face. If you walk out that door, without paying this deposit, you are turning your back on this family forever. Don't expect a Christmas card. Don't expect a call. I looked at the trio standing in the ruins of the dining room. Chloe was wiping her eyes, checking to see if the threat had worked. My father looked ready to physically bar the exit. My mother looked disappointed, like a puppeteer whose strings had finally snapped. For years, the fear of their rejection had kept me writing checks. I thought their love was a subscription service I had to keep renewing. But looking at them now, I realized the subscription had never offered any real content. You are right, I said, my voice steady for the first time that night. Everything I have is because of you. My anxiety, my scarcity mindset, my inability to trust anyone. I reached for the doorknob, the metal cool against my sweating palm. But the money, that's mine, and for the first time in my life, I am going to keep it. The silence behind me was absolute, a vacuum where their power used to be. I turned the handle and didn't look back at them. My hand was on the brass latch when my father's voice cracked like a whip. If you walk out that door, he bellowed, his voice vibrating in the floorboards, you are dead to us. No more holidays. You will be a stranger. It was the ultimate leverage, the nuclear option they had held over my head since childhood. He expected me to crumble. He expected the fear of orphanhood to buckle my knees. I froze, my grip tightening on the cold metal handle, letting the heavy threat settle into the silence. I turned slowly, facing the tableau of my tormentors one last time. My mother was holding her breath, eyes wide with anticipated victory. Chloe was smirking, sure that the ultimatum had worked. Okay, I said. The word was soft, dropping into the room like a stone in a pond. My father blinked, his face slackening. What did you say? He stammered. I said okay. I repeated, my voice gaining strength. If those are the terms, I accept them. I'm done buying my way onto the guest list of this family. Confusion rippled through them, replaced quickly by a dawn of panic. But I wasn't finished. If I was to be a stranger, I needed to untangle the financial knots that bound us. Wait, I said, reaching into my pocket again. My mother exhaled loudly, relieved. I knew it, she breathed, stepping forward with renewed confidence. I knew you wouldn't leave us high and dry. Just send the transfer, Morgan, and we can forget this tantrum." She thought I was surrendering. She couldn't have been more wrong. I unlocked my phone, the blue light illuminating my face in the dim hallway. My thumb hovered over the banking app icon. "You are right," I said, looking my father in the eye. "I shouldn't leave any loose ends." I opened the dashboard, ignoring the low battery warning. The interface loaded, showing my checking account balance. A number that had remained stagnant for years because of them. I tapped on the tab labeled Scheduled Transfers. It was the artery that had been bleeding me dry for a decade. My mother watched me with a hungry expression, practically counting the money in her head. "Make sure it clears by 9. She instructed, her tone reverting to its usual command. "The venue manager is expecting the funds at 9. I didn't look up. I found the entry, monthly family support, $1,500. It was set to recur indefinitely. Below it was the button I had been too afraid to press for years. It was small, red, and terrifyingly permanent. It simply read, "Cancel series." My thumb trembled slightly. "I am not sending the deposit," I said, my voice eerily calm. "I am canceling the monthly allowance." I tapped the screen. A confirmation box popped up. "Are you sure you want to stop recurring payments to Mom and Dad?" I didn't hesitate this time. I hit yes. A loading circle spun for a second that felt like an hour, and then a green checkmark appeared. Cancelled. The digital tether that had choked my financial future was gone. I looked up, turning the screen so they could see. The notification sound from my mother's phone on the table shattered the silence. Ding. She frowned, picking it up, expecting a deposit alert. As she read the bank email, her face drained of all color, leaving her looking gray and aged. "Robert," she whispered, clutching the counter for support. She stopped it. She stopped the monthly checks. Chloe gasped, her hands flying to her mouth.
"But that pays for my car lease!"
She shrieked. "How am I supposed to drive? You can't just take that away!" My father roared, a sound of pure, impotent rage. He charged toward me, his heavy footsteps thudding against the hardwood. "You vindictive little witch!" he shouted, spit flying from his lips. "Undo it! Undo it right now!" He looked ready to grab the phone from my hand, but he stopped 3 feet away. There was something in my eyes he hadn't seen before. It wasn't fear. It was the absolute, cold indifference of a stranger. He realized, with dawning horror, that he couldn't intimidate a ghost. "I can't undo it," I lied smoothly, pocketing the phone. "I am dead to you, remember? Strangers don't pay each other's car leases." I stepped around him. He was a large man, physically imposing, but in that moment, he seemed small. He didn't grab me. He didn't strike me. He just stood there, breathing hard, watching his retirement plan walk away. The power dynamic had inverted so fast the room felt dizzy. I was no longer the daughter. I was the one who got away. I opened the front door and stepped out onto the porch. The night air hit me like a splash of ice water, shocking and clarifying. Behind me, the house erupted into chaos. My mother sobbing, Chloe screaming accusations, my father shouting at the walls. But the sounds were muffled now, fading with every step I took down the driveway. I walked toward my rental car, my keys jingling in my hand. It was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. I was alone, finally, and I was free. The days following my departure were a digital siege. My aunt, who hadn't called me since I was 12, left 3 voicemails about duty and blood. My cousins sent texts accusing me of abandoning my parents. I didn't block them immediately. I watched the notifications pile up on my lock screen, like unread junk mail. It was a fascinating study in manipulation. For the first time, their anger didn't trigger my anxiety, it confirmed I was right. My silence was the only weapon I needed. Word eventually reached me that the wedding had been drastically downsized. The grand estate was out. The local community center was in. Chloe posted a dramatic status update about unforeseen betrayals and jealous saboteurs, spinning the narrative to make herself the victim. I expected to feel guilty, but all I felt was a strange, hollow relief. The circus was still in town, but I wasn't paying for the tickets anymore. Their public embarrassment was simply the price of their private greed. Back in my city, my life began to expand into the space they used to occupy. I stopped eating instant noodles to save pennies for their next crisis. I bought fresh vegetables, good coffee, and a soft rug for my living room. These were small luxuries, but they felt revolutionary. The money in my savings account was no longer a temporary holding fund for my father's bad decisions. It was mine. Every time I swiped my card for myself, it felt like a quiet act of rebellion. The silence in my apartment used to feel lonely, a reminder that I wasn't important enough to be called unless something broke. Now, it felt like peace. I dismantled the lie I had lived by, that my worth was tied to my utility. I thought if I paid enough, I would eventually buy their love. But love isn't a transaction. And family isn't a bill collector. I hadn't lost a support system. I had shed a parasite that was draining my spirit along with my bank account. One evening, I sat by the window watching the rain streak against the glass. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. It was a blocked number. Likely my mother trying a different line. In the past, my heart would have hammered against my ribs. I would have answered, apologizing for my existence. Today, I just watched the screen light up and fade back to black. The vibration stopped. The threat was gone because I no longer gave it power. I took a sip of wine. I am still rebuilding the parts of myself they hollowed out. It is a slow process, learning to exist without the weight of their expectations. I might never get an apology, and I might never go back to that house. But I have my dignity, and I have my freedom. I lost a family that never really saw me, but I finally found the person I was supposed to be. I am not the fixer anymore. I am just Morgan, and that is finally enough.